Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Thomas, and in preparation for 2025 season, I've been watching some 2024 season footage. And one of the really big things that I like to take away from watching this footage and reviewing some of these stages is seeing what actually works for me and what may not work, or some things that I have to improve on. A lot of times on the stage and on the clock, we think that we're doing something, but meanwhile, we're actually not, or we aren't doing something, but we actually are. And by kind of reviewing some of the footage that you can take of yourself, it allows you to go back and analyze each individual frame essentially to see what you can work on. Was that a good wind call? Was my body position right? Was my natural point of aim correct? Was some of the gear that I've used conducive for that specific stage and that specific position? So it allows you to really go back and look and see and break down each individual part of that video and stage, so you can get a better and more accurate picture of a future stage. So I'm going to kind of break this down ultimately into four sections. The first section is I'm just going to let the video play through. You're going to watch the entire stage as it's recorded, right? And then the next part will be a pre-stage briefing. So kind of what either my partner and I thought, or what I thought would be the best way to attack that stage and execute that specific stage at that time. Then I'm going to let the video play through. I'm going to watch the stage frame by frame and kind of stop and pick it apart. And then lastly, the fourth part would be a post brief of that stage, whether we were missing, why we were missing, things could have gone better. And now if I'm with a partner or myself and there's still more stages on in that day, how I can apply that to the next part of the day. So a few things. So I'm going to talk about how ultimately, before we even start the video, the stage, how it's set up, what are the requirements for the specific stage, and our rifles. My partner's rifle is an AI. He's shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor factory 140 ELDMs. His rifle is suppressed, and he is running a Night Force optic. And I am running a Lone Peak with a Proof Competition Contour steel 6 Creedmoor in a Generation 6 Whiskey 3 with a Collis K525i. I have my iPad here so I could draw directly on the screen so you could see exactly what I'm talking about in real time to allow it to be easier to see. And let's just talk about this stage. So this stage is the last stage of the last day. And what's nice and good about this stage is it's close, but one of the requirements for this stage is one person has to shoot off of a tripod and the other person has to shoot off of the prop or the rock. You can't swap, and it's going to be a 1-for-1. So your partner shoots and then you shoot a total of 20 points or 20 rounds, 10 each. But the big requirement ultimately for this is that you have to shoot support side. So for me, it's lefty, and for my partner, it is also on the left side. So a lot of times we don't really shoot support side, or we don't practice it, and that can produce a lot of challenges within itself, especially shooting off of a side that you really don't practice. But we're going to talk about that a little future towards the end of how you can actually optimize shooting support side by just doing a few things. So I'm going to let this video play through, and then we'll break it down. You first?
Okay. Sorry, one sec.
Take your time. Should be one more. I got one more, right?
No, we got.
Oh, that was it? Was that it?
No.
Oh.
I don't know how I'm burning over that. Turn it up.
Okay, so there's a bunch to break down there, right? So let's go back to the beginning. All right, so let's talk about how we thought about approaching this stage. So for one, if you look at the actual stage itself on the props, and specifically this vegetation here, right? So this stuff is pretty thick. It's kind of hard to tell from the video, but if you actually get down in that position, it's really almost difficult to see the coyote at 310 yards. The position on which you are in relation to that target is pretty difficult. So one of the nice things about this beginning part of the stage was that you were able to set up specifically on the rock and you were able to set up on the tripod, and you didn't have to try to start with your bag in your hand and all your gear in your hand and then get onto the stage or the positions on the clock. You were able to set up already, and then you just clicked, and then the beep went off and you started the stage, which was nice. Ultimately, it was kind of difficult to find it, but once we found it, it was kind of easy. Now, how did we determine who was actually going to shoot off of the prop and who was going to shoot off of the tripod? Ultimately, kind of came down to my partner said he was more comfortable shooting off of a tripod. And as we talked about it more and more, it actually was better that he did, because if you look at this rock in relation to me, right, this rock is pretty much the same size as me, right? So it was easy for me to get into this position without having to contort my body or move too much, because my partner was pretty tall. And we were kind of talking, and if he had to get onto that rock in that position, he'd actually be standing up a little taller, and it could induce a lot of wobble, vertical wobble up and down into his system and making him even more inaccurate. And if we're talking about our target, even though it's not that far, on the y-axis or up and down, it's not as forgiving as it would be on the x-axis or windage-wise. So it was probably better that he would shoot off of a tripod, especially that he was more comfortable. The other thing is that if you look on how the actual ground is, right, this is a pretty, again, the video doesn't do it justice. This is pretty steep. It's not super steep, but to try to shoot off of it, you were basically shooting uphill. It wasn't flat. You were basically shooting almost a 10 degree when we kind of figured it out. So even maybe more, right? So, and a lot of these targets, not this one specifically, but other targets, there were potentially no backdrop. So if you missed the target, that was it. So that's how we came out about that decision. Next up, let's actually walk through the beginning part of the stage.
You first?
Okay.
All right, so we should just stop there, right? One of the big things that I was thinking about is determining who should have started the stage, right? And the reason that is because throughout the 6 stages that we had during that day, the wind was kind of crazy and kind of wild, actually. So if you've never shot a Cameo, there could be one time when you shoot at one part of the range and the wind is coming completely right to left. And then there's another time when you could be shooting on the other side of the range and you have a complete left to right. And you have a total switch in your wind. And that could be obviously quite confusing. And more importantly, it can not make it easy if you're trying to get a good wind call and all of a sudden you have almost 180-degree shift in your wind. So it was kind of easier for my partner and I, for me to come up with a wind call that I thought was accurate, or the best estimated wind call. And then we went with that, which I thought was about a 3 or 4 mile an hour wind in this part of the day. And now earlier in the day, I mean, it was getting up to almost 18 miles an hour. So it was pretty swift, switchy and gusty at the same time. So that was one of the reasons that we kind of waited until the actual stage start, because when we were going back and forth and trying to determine who was actually going to start, it could have changed, right? So ultimately, it was just easier for him to start, and because the target was close and the wind was not that much. So I'm going to also pause it there for a minute. So what I should have done is I should have waited and kind of given him an extra second to make an impact, and then I should have waited and read the plate. And I should have corrected him back onto the middle of the plate and not just let him have that 0.2 or 0.3 hold off of either side. And I should have done that because if like he missed on that third shot, I should have really determined how he missed it or why he missed it. Was it over the top? Was it under it? Was it left or right of it? And if I didn't actually make a good baseline call for where that actual shot missed, it'd be rather difficult to determine where he was in that entire sequence. So I should have taken more time, should have slowed down, and really read the plate and given him a correction to get back onto the middle of the plate instead of letting him just rock it. So that was my fault. We had plenty of time to shoot this match, and I should have just slowed down. Right, again, continually reading that plate. We should be really trying to shoot to try to hit the middle of the plate and not try to adjust based upon how the plate is moving and rocking.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Take your time. Should be one more. I got one more, right?
All right, so let's stop it here because this is where things kind of fell apart a little bit. So number one, I had a click and no bang, right? So immediately run the bolt, try to manipulate the bolt to try to get another round in, and determine that because of how the actual magazine was sitting on the rock, it was causing a lot of pressure and a failure to feed. And I realized that after, not actually during the stage. So I was having some problems with how the actual mag was feeding into the rifle. So there was a few things that are a big takeaway from there for me personally. So number one, if that continually happens, my gears obviously has to change, right? So after this match, I wound up buying 2 AW mags because of the way that the ACIS mags were feeding off of the rock and into the rifle. And it was causing a really big problem for me. Like I said before, the way that the actual terrain was going uphill like this, we were shooting uphill. And if the target was further, it would have actually been a lot more difficult for me to even potentially see that target, because the way that the mag was interfacing with the bottom or the top of the rock and the bottom of the magazine, with the little space that I had with the game changer, it was causing a lot of space issues, and ultimately was causing me to have a lot of binding problems. So when I thought I was chambering around, I actually wasn't. And another big part of that was that I was trying to count both of our shots. I was counting his shot and my shot. And I should have just focused on shooting or counting my shots, because it would have given me a baseline of, okay, if he shot first, then I know that he has one more round ahead of me, right? And it would have been better for me to keep track of the amount of shots that I took that way instead of trying to count all of them. And that's how I kind of got a little confused. If you hear me, I ask my partner, I say, hey, are we done? And he says, oh, I don't know. He looked behind him, and then that's when I looked behind and asked the RO, and he said no. And now I'm trying to figure out how many shots we have. And now I'm just kind of almost relying on him to see when he's done, and then I'm going to follow up. Another thing that kind of helped me in the situation, because I planned for it, is having a spare magazine and a 2-round quiver. So if you look at the back over here, right, you could see that mag carrier that I have. That has a 5-round emergency stash of 5 rounds. And the reason I have that is if I have a mag failure, if I forget to load a mag, if something happens, I know that I at least have 5 rounds to attempt to at least get some points on that stage. And also I have the 2-round quiver. So total, I have 7 rounds out of potentially 10 possible points. So I don't get a complete 0, but I'll also be able to at least make some attempt at that stage. So that was one of the big things where ultimately in that stage kind of fell apart with not keeping track of how many rounds I've had put down range, and ultimately having poor communication between my partner and I, determining how many rounds we did on that stage. So that was pretty big, and definitely something I'm going to take away. And more importantly, getting a different magazine to bring with to shoot out west. Because where I'm from in New York, we might be shooting out further, right? We could be shooting to 1,000 yards right up at Sheepdog, but it's either off of a barricade where there's no magazine issues of hitting a piece of terrain or a prop down underneath, or we're shooting prone. And again, there's no issue on it. But something like this where I kind of had problems all weekend where my magazine was hitting a rock, or it was hitting some sort of, it was just getting in the way, and then I was having a failure to feed, and it was just causing a bigger problem. So ultimately, shortening that mag up, putting an AW mag, and then eventually getting a magazine kind of stop where it's not going to hit against the mag, like i.e. in the new C4 chassis, gives you the ability to not put pressure on that magazine. So that was a really big takeaway from not only just this specific match, but this stage as well.
Oh, that was it? Was that it?
No.
Oh.
As you can see there, right, you can see actually, when you look at the underneath here, you can see how much pressure is actually being put on this magazine there. And that's ultimately what was causing those failure to feeds, what I thought was actually chambering around.
Yeah, I don't know how I'm burning over that. Clean it up.
That was the last one.
Yeah. What's the score on that?
So ultimately, the stage went pretty good. We got 17 out of 20 rounds downrange and impacting that coyote. But there's obviously a lot of things that we could have worked on, right? And another big thing for shooting support side is, so there's a few things. Number one, I have to work on my trigger control. If you actually look where my trigger finger was on my left side, I kept pulling it off. So right about here, right? If you watch that, you can see.
Take it off.
So I popped my finger off too quick, right? One of the really big things for long range shooting, right, or running a bolt gun, is pinning that trigger to the rear for at least 1/1000th of a second post shot process, right? Because it allows you to have good follow through and allows you to actually see what is happening downrange and get the story of what the bullet has told you on the target. Read the plate, read the surrounding debris or dirt if you miss, right? It allows you to just impact and take in what you're seeing downrange instead of focusing on running the bolt and potentially doing another trigger press. So because it's a support side, not that it's that should be neglected, but ultimately I'm not used to shooting support side as much. So one of the big things I have to focus on is pinning that trigger to the rear and thinking about 1/1000 after, right? It's not like an AR or a pistol where you press and then you reset, right? You just pull the trigger and then you reset. It has to pull it and keep it to the rear. 1, 2, and then run the bolt and do it again, right? Ultimately, that's what will allow you to get a better shot process and focus on pinning that trigger to the rear. Another thing to help with support side shooting is lower your cheek piece. So undo your cheek piece and lower it a little bit, and allows you to get a better cheek weld into the side of your rifle and allowing you to get a better sight picture. A lot of times we cant our head a lot when I'm shooting, at least for me, when I shoot support side. So lowering that cheek piece, or sometimes even taking it off. But I've gotten to the point where I know how to lower it, and then I actually have it marked with a pen, like a silver Sharpie. So when I go back to shooting strong side, all I have to do is just adjust it, retighten it, and I'm good to go. So there's no like trying to find it again. You get back onto the next stage, and now you're trying to search and find the correct spot to put your cheek on. Well, if you mark it, then you already have it, and then when you go onto a stage like this, you just lower it a little bit, and you're able to get into the optic a lot easier and get a better sight picture. And lastly, talking about just the overall stage on the last part of this was my partner missing, right? So a lot of times we've kind of, at least for me, when I shoot off of a tripod, I have to almost settle into it a little bit. And sometimes if you don't settle into it and you keep the reticle exactly on where the target is, like you could see on the screen, when you actually induce a little bit of shoulder pressure into it, you actually make the reticle come off of target. So once you put a little bit of pressure into it and kind of settle down, it causes the reticle to rise up, hence you hitting and impacting over the top of the target. So one of the big things that you could do to avoid that happening is start about 2 mils high on your reticle, and then once you start 2 mils high and you make that shoulder connection and you settle into the rifle, it'll actually, now the reticle will fall directly onto the target, and that'll give you a better, more consistent point of aim, resulting in point of impact. And I think after speaking to my partner after this stage, is that he was trying to induce a little bit of muscle tension into the rifle instead of trying to use his natural point of aim, which in turn caused him to miss over the top of the target. So let's just kind of backtrack. A few things, right? Recoil management was pretty good for support side, could be better. Bolt manipulation needs to be worked on as far as keeping the reticle on the target the entire time. But we made some good impacts. We actually honestly had a good target to rely on for windage, but we could have worked on that a little bit better. But ultimately, the actual stage went pretty well. So if you guys like this video, please drop a comment below. Let me know what you think. And if you don't, or you'd like to see something different, let me know. I have a few more stages that I definitely want to do a review on. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like and subscribe. And I hope to see you guys soon.